The cubs were crying long before the rangers heard them. Out on the savannah, sound carried differently. High, sharp, and desperate. The kind of sound that cut through wind and dust and made even birds pause mid-flight. 2 lion cubs crouched beside a low patch of thorn scrub, their fur matted with dust. Each whimper was short and hoarse, the sound of hunger and fear tangled together. Their mother lay a few meters away, her flank rising shallowly, eyes half shut. A deep wound scored her shoulder. The mark of a poacher's snare that had torn loose when she fought to escape. She had survived the night, but barely. Now the sun was climbing higher, and vultures circled overhead in widening loops. The cubs nudged her face, mewing softly. She raised her head, managed a growl that faded into a wheeze, then lowered it again. Across the dry riverbed, a herd of elephants moved in slow procession. Dust rose around their feet like smoke. At their center walked an old matriarch. Scarred, calm, her ears heavy and torn at the edges. She led with a steady rhythm, trunk testing the air, guiding the younger ones through the heat haze. When the wind shifted, she stopped. Her trunk lifted. She smelled something strange. Blood, fear, decay. She turned her head toward it, listening. The herd followed her gaze. A few younger cows rumbled uneasily, their calves pressing close. This was not elephant scent. It was predator danger. But the matriarch didn't move away. She waited, ears spread, weighing the sound beneath the wind. Then it came again. A high, pitiful cry. A cry not of threat, but of need. She took a step forward. The herd hesitated at the edge of the riverbed, their feet sinking into soft dust. The matriarch crossed first, trunk low, tracing the scent trail across the cracked mud. The others followed, uneasy but obedient. When they reached the other side, she saw them. 2 tiny shapes trembling beside a larger one. The lioness lifted her head weakly, golden eyes clouded with pain. She saw the elephants and tried to rise, but her legs failed. She snarled once, feebly, then slumped back against the earth. Blood trickled from a bullet wound in her shoulder. The matriarch stopped several paces away. Her herd fanned behind her, snorting softly. The younger cows shifted, uncertain. But the old elephant did not retreat. She rumbled low in her chest, a sound of warning. Not to the lioness, but to what circled just beyond the clearing. Hyenas. 3 of them, thin and patient, crouched behind a termite mound. Their eyes gleamed yellow in the heat shimmer. The vultures above began to spiral lower. The matriarch raised her head and trumpeted once, loud and sharp. The hyenas flinched, scattering back toward the brush. Dust swirled in their wake. The cubs froze, then inched toward her massive gray legs. One sniffed the ground, confused, before letting out a soft chirp. The elephant looked down at them, trunk curling slightly. She exhaled, long and steady, a gust that stirred the fur on their backs. Behind her, the younger elephants shifted in a loose circle, forming a wall. The matriarch stepped forward until she stood beside the injured lioness. The lioness opened her eyes again, pupils narrowing against the light. She didn't move this time. Her body trembled once, then stilled. The elephant lowered her trunk to the lioness's side, touching the air above her wound without contact. Then she rumbled again. Deeper this time, a sound that vibrated through the ground. To the others it was a command. Stay. And so they did. For hours they stood like that. The sun blazed white, shadows shrinking beneath them. The cubs dozed in short bursts, pressing against the elephant's front foot for shade. The lioness breathed shallowly, her ears twitching at each insect buzz. The vultures circled lower, landing now in clusters along the nearby branches. Each time one hopped too close, the matriarch flicked dust with her trunk until it retreated. When hyenas crept back toward the scent, she faced them head-on. Her trumpets shattered the air, sending them scattering again into the grass. The younger elephants grew restless, shifting from foot to foot, trunks touching the calves for reassurance. But the matriarch held her ground. Her eyes stayed fixed on the lioness and the small cubs that clung to life beside her. One of the younger cows stepped forward once, uncertain. The matriarch brushed her trunk against her shoulder, a quiet gesture that said everything. Not yet. By late afternoon the heat began to break. Clouds gathered at the horizon. The wind changed, carrying the smell of rain. And diesel. Far off, beyond the acacia line, came the sound of engines. The rangers were out on patrol, scanning the horizon for the source of the circling vultures they'd spotted through binoculars. The vehicles bumped across the dry ground, closing in. When they arrived at the clearing, they stopped. "Lions," one said. "But, look." The herd stood motionless in the half-light. Dust glowed gold around their feet. The matriarch was still at the front, her massive frame casting a shadow over the fallen lioness and her cubs. The rangers stayed in the trucks. No one dared interrupt. Cameras clicked softly. The matriarch turned her head toward the sound of engines. For a moment her gaze met theirs. Unreadable, ancient, steady. Then she rumbled once more, deep and low. Behind her, the herd began to move. Slowly, silently, they turned back toward the riverbed. Calves pressed close to their mothers, ears brushing together as they walked. The matriarch was the last to leave. She paused at the edge of the clearing and looked down one final time at the lioness. Then she raised her trunk, touching it briefly to the ground beside the cubs. A gesture so gentle it was almost invisible, and turned away. The cubs let out soft cries as she left. The herd's footsteps faded into the distance until only the whisper of wind remained. The rangers waited until the elephants were gone before approaching. The lioness was alive, barely. They tranquilized her and lifted her carefully onto a tarp. The cubs were gathered into a crate, huddling together, eyes wide. When they drove away, the vultures stayed high above, circling but never landing. That night, rain swept across the plains, washing away the tracks of both herd and hyenas. By morning, the sky was clear again. The rangers returned to the spot to check for signs of movement. There were none. Just the imprint of wide, round feet around the hollow where the lioness had lain. The largest print was pressed deep into the earth beside two smaller paw marks. It looked almost deliberate, a moment frozen in mud. When word of the rescue spread, the photo reached around the world. People called it a miracle. But those who worked in the bush knew better. The savannah had its own language. Sometimes mercy spoke through silence. And somewhere out beyond the dry riverbed, an old matriarch led her herd through the tall grass, her ears catching every sound, her memory holding one more story no human would ever truly understand.